My name is Abra Berens, and I'm a chef and author based in Galeen, Michigan. So I grew up on a pickle farm about 20 miles south of Holland, Michigan, and that was my dad's family who traditionally were farming it. Both my parents were also anesthesiologists, and so we had sort of a funny mix-up of, it wasn't a traditional farming family, but farming was through and through what we did. And also eating around the table was a big part of what we did. So food was always really central, but it never occurred to me until I started working in restaurants, and specifically restaurants that were working with the local food movement, which is when I started cooking at Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor, that how differently the pickles that we were raising growing up were treated than this produce that I was seeing at the market. And that the pickles we grew, thousands of pounds of them, and then they were trucked off in big gravity wagons out to Heinz or to Pilgrim Farms to be processed into pickles, cucumbers, obviously not pickles. They don't grow in like a jar on the plant. And so, seeing that versus starting to build a relationship with a farmer at a farmer's market or something like that, I started to think about kind of these other things as ingredients. But I always was raised with a really deep respect for the work that goes into farming on sort of all scales. And from there, I think like every farm kid, as soon as you can get your driver's license and get an off-farm job, you do that. And so I started working in restaurants when I was 16 and really fell in love with just how a restaurant functions. It's a really very chaotic, but also structured place that has a lot of drama, whether you want there to be drama or not. And it's really just some of the best relationships I've ever had have been in restaurants. So when I went to the University of Michigan, it made sense that I was going to look for a job, and I started working at Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor. And it was there that I started out just, taking orders and ringing people up and running sandwiches and stuff to being in the kitchen. And Roger Bowser, who is a family friend, but also just a really incredible chef, brought me into the kitchen at Zingerman's. I think mostly because I kept asking him, can you teach me how to make chicken paprikash? Can you teach me how to make these pot pies? Can you teach me how to, and he was finally like, oh God, just come in here and start working. And so it was there that he was just starting to bring food in from Tantray Farms and some of these other farms in Ann Arbor into our salad case and into the production, and really getting to see that difference. And so after working for him for a couple of years, I was trying to decide what I wanted to do after college. And it was either go into the Peace Corps or go to cooking school. And so I left Zingerman's and went to Ballymaloe, again, County Cork, 100-acre working organic farm, and then a 12-week cooking program where you're cooking only things that they're growing on the farm. And a lot of it was just traditional Irish food, but I didn't, I think when people think about Irish food, they don't really think of a broad vegetable palette besides potatoes and maybe cabbage. And so it was a real eye-opener to see, just how much food was coming out of that region and how deep-rooted these traditions were. And it made me think a lot about the Midwest and about how, in college, people would often would actively say it's flyover country, or if there's no culture here, there's no food culture here, all those things, and realizing that there is a deep food culture in the Midwest, and that vegetables might not be the most celebrated part of that, but they're certainly a part of our tradition. So all of those ideas were kind of in my mind on and off. And then I moved back to the States, got a job in Chicago working for some of the best farm-to-table restaurants, a really thriving local food movement and restaurant community there that welcomed me in. But as much as I was learning about all these vegetables, I knew that I wanted to kind of recreate what Ballymaloe had, which is, a food business that was tied to a farm. And so I was thinking about what it would mean to have a restaurant that's so inextricably tied to a farm. And so I started kind of thinking about that and talking about it with my husband. And then my friend Jess wanted to start a farm. So in 2009, we started Bare Knuckle Farm up in Northport, Michigan, and started doing just what we had talked about, vegetable farming, and kind of giving it a go. So that was the first time that I really realized what it took to grow, more than just one crop at a time, or, to move to that smaller scale intensive farming versus the larger scale, kind of more commercial farming that I had grown up with. And I expected to learn a lot of things, I expected to be challenged in a lot of ways, but I did not expect for my entire style of food to change. And I came up in restaurants that right at the, sort of the crescendo of the nose to tail movement, where it was like, the meatier, the better, and the more organ meat, the better, and not wasting anything, but also kind of that like, well, have you had heart? Well, have you had bones? Like that sort of thing. And so I was definitely influenced by that. And then suddenly I was writing these menus for the farm dinners that we were hosting in Jess's family's cottage, and wanting to showcase the things that we were growing, and it was all vegetables. And so, suddenly turning 7 courses to be a like celebration of vegetables. And those years were so formative because it really made this flip for me of thinking up a dish and then sourcing the ingredients to fulfill that vision, to looking at the ingredients and then creating dishes out of that. And it sounds like such a small switch, but it really was this like kind of eye-opening change for me, which is that the best things are some of the things that are right around you. Like we're looking at this, sitting next to this rosemary right now, and it's like, it makes me just want to put it in everything, and I don't feel that sort of inspiration from reading it on a page or even just from thinking about it. And then it also sort of gave me a new appreciation for different ways to cook with vegetables. So different ways, because we have the same ingredients that come in and out of the season and of the year, but they're the same year after year. So it's like, if somebody's going to come to a farm dinner and have asparagus the first year, if they come back a year later, it better be different. It better be like something interesting for them. And so, that kind of got me to thinking about like the different ways of preparation techniques of, poaching asparagus versus grilling it versus serving it raw. Or if you're going to cook it the same way, how do you change the components that are with it to make it feel new and exciting so that it's sort of masking the potential boredom from the fact that we grow, a limited number of things in the Northern Midwest. And so that was all kind of plugging around in my head. And then I started writing a food column for the Traverse City Record-Eagle that was really meant to just kind of sum up the information that we were giving people every week at our farmers market stand. Almost every week, somebody would say, all right, Abra, we got beets. What do we do? What do I do with a beet? And it was this vegetable that I feel like beets are sort of given this reputation of being like, the most classic vegetable. Like everybody's grandmother had a beet somewhere in her kitchen, and yet so many people are like, I've never cooked these. I don't know what to do with them. And I've never seen them with the greens on, or I've never seen golden ones. I've never seen candy striped one. I've never seen these ones that look like giant torpedoes. Like, how do I cook with them? And so that column was really meant to sort of codify some of that information and pass on that information. And then that column became sort of the foundation for Ruffage, which is my cookbook, A Practical Guide to Vegetables. And, a lot of people laugh at the spelling of Ruffage, which I just think is like a nice, I think it makes sense to spell it that way. It's sort of like crunchy and ruffly, like cabbage. But then it's also the practical guide. And so I think that that's the other biggest thing about cookbooks and vegetable cooking in general, any cooking really, is if it's not practical, it's not going to get used, and people aren't going to be able to come in after they've been at work all day and feel like they can have the tools to whip something up that's a little bit creative, that's a riff on what they have in their kitchens, and feel good about it. And so that was the goal, was to say, like, these are the vegetables that we have, especially in the Midwest and maybe some other places besides that. These are the ways that I cook them. And these are all the like little condiments or sauces or different things you can have on hand so that you can always make something do. So if you don't have feta, you can use goat cheese. Or if you don't have rice, you could use barley, or something like that, and kind of swapping those things in and out and really giving people at least sort of that same mental shift that happened for me when I started farming, which is ideally, you go to the market, you go to your CSA, and then you have all of these ingredients. And so you're forced to come up with something from those ingredients, as opposed to scouring the internet for something that sounds good and then going to the store and buying that stuff and then coming home and cooking it. It hopefully speeds up that process a little bit. The most memorable part of writing a cookbook is still happening. And it's happening when someone writes and says, I never liked beets, and now I do. And I never thought that I could work through an entire CSA box. And this has been the tool that's helped me to do that. I think that is unbelievably rewarding, especially when I kind of thought only my dad would read it. And so to have other people reading it and benefiting from it feels like a positive. I'm not even sure my dad has read it. So we're really like, thankfully other people are. But then also I think that the memorable part of writing the cookbook was really working with the team around it. And I think this has parallels in other parts of the food world, which is that when you surround yourself with people who are better than you and better at their individual things than you, the end result is so much better. So like, I can't take a very good picture, really ever. And I certainly can't draw. And so bringing in people like E.E. Berger, who took all the photos, and Lucy Enkelman, who drew all of the drawings, and then relying on the team at Chronicle to make it into something more than just a big Word document, which is what it would have been if I were doing it myself, is such a rewarding thing. And I think that parallels both the classroom, kitchens, farms, all of those things. And so finding those people who are going to lift a project up by bringing their own stamp to it is really valuable. So right now, I am the chef at GRANOR Farm, which is a certified organic biodiverse vegetable farm in Three Oaks. And what we do is on-farm dining. So people arrive to the farm and they get a guided tour of our growing spaces. So in the summertime, that's the most beautiful vegetable fields you can see. In the wintertime, it's our greenhouse because there's food that's being, as everybody here understands, food is getting grown year round. It just looks different and it's in different settings. And so really trying to give people a window into how this food is produced in this region and then to see it on the plate. And so I think that, restaurants or dining out is traditionally a way for people both to have some inspiration, and it's a form of entertainment, but it's also a time where we build relationships with each other by sharing food over a table. Plant-forward cooking for me, I like to say it's plant-based, not plant-exclusive. So I still eat meat and dairy and all those things. But I found when I was cooking, so my first year farming, I was really, really broke because we had put all of our money into starting this farm. And I didn't want to buy any food because I was just so tight on cash. And so from our farm, we had some carrots that were still in the ground. We had cut back all of the kale plants because they were just like covered in aphids, and the stumps had grown up these little tiny baby kale leaves. And then we still had about 18 or so eggs from the chickens, which we had relocated to another friend's farm. And so every night I was making different dishes with like carrots, kale, and eggs, carrots, kale, and eggs, carrots, kale, and eggs, over and over and over again. And like just the whole time, like dreaming of going back to Chicago and having like a proper job where I was getting paid and like eating like meat and cheese and salami and pie and all that stuff. And I traditionally would work in November at a pie shop to help them out with Thanksgiving. So I was eating like probably 3 slices of pie a day and endless amounts of coffee and like meat and salami and cheese. And I felt like garbage. And all of a sudden I was just like, I actually really miss those kale carrot dinners. And so I went to the store, bought some vegetables, and felt so rejuvenated. But then also, as I started kind of learning more about climate change and climate collapse that we're going through right now, and all of the different things, and then also the labor industry part of agriculture, I think that eating a plant-based diet it's better for the environment because it just produces less greenhouse gas and captures more carbon than other forms of agriculture. It has a lot of sustainability factors, but something that we don't talk that much about is it also employs more people. It is very hard to mechanize the work that goes into a small vegetable farm. That's part of why it's expensive, and it's not nearly as expensive as it should be. And I think we're seeing that by the number of farmers who are leaving the farming industry. And so if we're talking about employment and keeping jobs in this country and creating jobs in this country, I think that vegetable farming plays a real role there. And I think that it also plays a role because it doesn't just affect people who are growing vegetables. It can affect the next class of cooks who are coming up and have the same sort of benefit that I received by doing some of that farming and what might come out of it. It could affect the lunch lady. It could affect teachers. It could affect students. It could affect daycare. And the mental health benefits that come from being outside are tremendous. And so I think that if we were to look at what types of jobs we want to create and value that work and we're willing to pay for it, I think vegetable farming has a huge role in that. And so that's why I think it's important on a couple of macro levels, but the one that I think we talk the least amount is the employment part of it. I think that the conversations around plant-forward cooking in the food world are important for a couple of reasons. I think that the public, for people who don't spend, minimum 8 hours, often 8 to 14 hours a day, thinking about food, cooking food, being around food, doing all of those things, I think they're looking to the culinary world to be those thought leaders and to show the way in the same way that, like if you think about high fashion, and I don't know that much about fashion, but if you think about high fashion, one of the benefits of it is that it trickles down into all of these other parts of the design and fashion and home goods worlds. I think the same is true for food. So I think what happens in restaurant and professional kitchens and education kitchens, it radiates outward. And so if suddenly there's just more options and there's more buzz around cooking with plants and vegetables, I think that it will become part of the conversation and that it'll enter more people's homes. And that's where a big shift can happen that is good for different families. I also think it's important in the culinary world because there's just a lot of options. And I think that to say that the only way to sell a dish is if it has a big meaty portion on it is really undervaluing the curiosity and the interest level of our customers. But if we don't give them that option and tell them that we're excited about it, of course they're going to keep ordering a giant burger or a giant steak. And I love those things too, but I don't want to eat it every day. And I don't want it to be the only thing that I'm allowed to eat by virtue of being offered it. And so I think that the culinary world can play a big role in plant forward simply by giving better options and raising the awareness about it. So I think the best way to incorporate vegetables into your diet is to number one, find vegetables you're excited about. I think the best way to be excited about something is often if they are so beautiful. And so, because it makes me excited to cook with them and to eat them. And for me, that means going to a farm or a farmer's market or becoming a CSA member. And CSA is a community-supported agriculture. You buy into a farm in the spring and you're paid back from your investment with a box of produce every week. And I think a CSA is important because A, you have a lot of vegetables on hand, so you have to cook with them. You've already paid for them, so there's no getting your money back. And also, it exposes you to things that you might not buy if you had the option to go. Like, I'm not sure anybody really goes to the store and is like, ooh, I really hope they have giant kohlrabi. Some people do, but yeah, or like, I just want a huge head of fennel, but then it shows up in your CSA box and you're like, okay, I've got a giant kohlrabi. I'm going to make a lot of coleslaw with my kohlrabi, or things like that, and find sort of new ways to work through it. So that would be the top two reasons: is find food that you're excited about, and particularly join the CSA. I think the third thing is don't go to the store, because if you don't have options on hand, you will figure out how to make something with what you have in place. And so if you are coming home from work, you can't really remember what's in the fridge and you just want something to eat for dinner, my inclination is to go to the store and then buy something that I'll feel good about. But if you don't do that, if you just go home, there's almost always something at home that you can make do. Even if it's a night where you're just going to have a pasta and whatever random cheese is in your fridge and a little bit of chili oil and a handful of greens that was cowering in the back of the crisper drawer, that is still dinner, and that still means that you're eating up something that you might not have otherwise. I also think that number 4 is committing to buying less meat. And I think a lot of people, especially people who are coming from the more meat and potatoes tradition, are often very worried about not feeling full. But if you buy less meat, you'll have less of it on hand, and then you'll have more vegetables to fill that gap. And it is possible to get very full on vegetables. And it's a different type of full. I feel like it's very rare that I eat like 4 different vegetable plates and then I'm like really moaning about it afterwards, but I definitely feel full and satiated. But then I'm often hungry for dessert again in a couple hours. And so I think that if you buy less meat and really focus on just heaping up your plate with vegetables, then you will often feel full and you'll eat more of those vegetables. So those are that might only be 4. I don't know, what's a 5th one? Or I guess this is the one. Use fat and salt. And I think this will show up in the recipes that we're gonna demonstrate later, but oftentimes vegetable eating is given this sort of like moral, like sanctimonious sort of like air to it. I mean, it's just another foodstuff, but also a lot of those micronutrients are fat soluble. And so there's a reason they taste good together. And so let them taste good. And it's okay. It's not like, some sort of penance to eat vegetables. It can be good in a celebration and just let them be that. The final thing, I think a lot about whether or not work in food is important. There's so much important work that happens in this world. And I think we're seeing a lot of it with the COVID-19 pandemic and, the nature of working in a hospital or of being a community leader who's distributing food to people, or being an educator who's being sure that these kids are not, having that sort of lost generation of education or social centeredness or all those things. And so sometimes I wonder, like, is cooking dinner for people like really meaningful? But I think that it is because food touches all of these things. It touches environmental issues, it touches labor issues, it touches cultural issues, it touches accessibility issues and inclusivity issues and all of those things. And I think that we have to think about what we want for our future and then go after it. And I think that the type of world that we want for food automatically affects all of those other things. And every single person has to eat, ideally every day, ideally multiple times a day. And so you have all of those opportunities to affect that change. And if the thing that you're doing is spending your dollars at a local grocery or at a local farmer's market and keeping that money in your region and supporting those jobs or being able to create another food job, then I think that is worth it and that is powerful. And you get to eat at the end of it. So it is a really delicious way to be an activist, is by making good food choices.